The vast expanse of the Arizona territory stretched out like a canvas painted by a merciless god, where the sun scorched the earth by day and the stars pierced the cold night sky with indifferent sharpness. Elias Kane had called this land home for nigh on a decade, ever since he'd fled the shadows of his past in Texas, where the law had a way of twisting justice into something unrecognizable. He was a man of few words, his face etched with lines that spoke of hard winters and harder choices, his hands calloused from reins and rifles rather than the soft grip of companionship. His ranch was a humble affair, tucked against the base of a jagged mesa that rose like a sentinel from the desert floor. A single-room cabin of sun-bleached pine logs, a corral housing a dozen Mustangs he'd broken himself, and a meager plot of corn that fought valiantly against the arid soil of these were his kingdom, his solitude. Folks in the distant town of Redstone whispered about him, the loner who spoke to no one, who traded hides and horses sporadically, always with a wary eye and a loaded Winchester at his side. Some said he'd killed a man over a card game, others claimed it was a woman, or perhaps both. Elias didn't correct them. Truth was, he'd done what he had to, and the ghosts of those deeds haunted him enough without inviting more company. On that fateful afternoon, the heat shimmered off the ground in waves, distorting the horizon into a mirage of false promises. Elias was riding the fence line, mending a break where coyotes had likely tested their luck, when he spotted something unnatural in the dry creek bed ahead. At first, he thought it a bundle of discarded hides, but as he drew nearer, the faint rise and fall of labored breathing gave it away. Dismounting with the caution of a man who'd learned to expect ambushes, he approached on foot, his boots crunching softly on the parched gravel. There, half buried in the sand and scrub brush, lay a young Apache girl, her lithe form crumpled like a discarded rag doll. She couldn't have been more than 16 summers, her long black hair matted with dust and blood, her buckskin dress torn at the side where a deep gash swept crimson onto the earth. Her eyes, dark as obsidian, fluttered open at his approach, filled with a mix of defiance and delirium. A fever burned in her cheeks, and her lips were cracked from thirst. Elias knelt beside her, his shadow falling over her like a reluctant shield. He'd seen enough death in his time on battlefields during the war, in dusty saloons, and out here in the wilds to know she was dancing on its edge. "Who did this to you?" he muttered, more to himself than her, knowing she likely didn't speak his tongue. The wound looked like a knife slash, ragged and infected, perhaps from a skirmish with settlers or rival tribes. Apaches had been pushed hard these last years, their lands shrinking under the tide of miners and ranchers flooding in from the east. Elias harbored no love for the Apache. They traded his stock more than once, vanishing into the hills like ghosts. But neither did he bear them hatred. Survival was a brutal game out here, and everyone played by the same unforgiving rules. He glanced around, scanning the horizon for signs of pursuit or kin. Nothing but the endless blue sky and the distant outline of mountains. With the sigh that carried the weight of his isolation, he pulled his canteen from his saddlebag and trickled water onto her lips. She drank greedily at first, then coughed, her body racked with pain. "Easy now," he said, his voice a low rumble. Tearing a strip from his own shirt, he pressed it against the wound, eliciting a sharp hiss from her. She didn't cry out, thought Apache pride, he figured. Her hand gripped his arm weakly, her nails digging in like a cornered animal's claws. Carrying her back to his ranch wasn't part of any plan Elias had for the day, but leaving her to die felt like inviting more bad karma than he already carried. He hoisted her onto his horse, her slight weight barely registering against the beast's broad back. She slumped against him as they rode, her feverish heat seeping through his shirt. The journey was short, but every jolt of the horse's gait drew a muffled groan from her. At the cabin, he laid her on his narrow cot, the only bed he owned, and set to work properly. Boiling water over the fire, he cleaned the wound as best he could with the rag and some whiskey from his flask. Not the finest medicine, but it was all he had. The gash was deep, slicing through muscle but missing vital organs by the grace of whatever spirits watched over her. He stitched it crudely with needle and thread from his mending kit, her body tensing but never fully waking. By the time he finished, sweat beaded his brow, and the sun had dipped low, casting long shadows through the open door. As evening cloaked the land, Elias sat by the window, his rifle across his lap, nursing a tin cup of black coffee. The girl slept fitfully, her breaths shallow but steady. He wondered about her people. The Apache bands roamed these parts, fierce and elusive, led by warriors like Victorio or Geronimo, names that struck fear into settlers' hearts. If they found her here, with him, a white man, it could mean trouble, big trouble. But what was he to do? Ride to Redstone and hand her over to the sheriff? They'd likely lock her up or worse, seeing her as just another savage. No, better she heal here, then slip away when able. Elias wasn't one for charity, but something in her eyes reminded him of his sister, long dead from fever back east. A flicker of humanity in his hardened soul. The night deepened, stars twinkling like distant campfires. Elias dozed lightly, his senses attuned to the desert's whispers, to the rustle of wind through mesquite, the distant yip of coyotes. Then, a horse whinnied in the corral, ears pricked. Elias snapped alert, peering into the darkness. Shadows moved beyond the fence line, silent and purposeful. One, then two, then more silhouettes of mounted men, feathers catching the moonlight, faces painted in war colors. Apaches. His heart thudded steady, not with fear but resolve. He'd counted on this. Deep down, they were here for the girl, no doubt tracking her blood trail or following some instinctual bond. Elias rose slowly, rifle in hand, and stepped to the door. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of sage and horse sweat. He counted them as they emerged from the gloom, 80 strong, perhaps more, their rifles and bows at the ready, eyes gleaming like predators. This wasn't a raiding party, it was a war band, the kind that could wipe out a settlement in hours. The leader dismounted, an older warrior with a face like weathered leather, scars crisscrossing his cheeks. He wore a bandolier of ammunition and a necklace of bear claws, symbols of battles won. Elias stood his ground on the porch, the cabin's lamplight spilling out behind him like a challenge. The warrior spoke first, his voice guttural in Apache tongue, gesturing toward the cabin. Elias didn't understand the words, but the intent was clear: give us the girl. He shook his head slowly, pointing to his chest and the wound on his side, mimicking bandaging. I helped her, he said, knowing it was futile. She's hurt bad, but healing. The warrior's eyes narrowed, his hand resting on a knife hilt. The others shifted, murmurs rippling through the ranks. Elias's mind raced. At 80 against 1 was suicide, but running wasn't an option. The corral was too exposed, and they'd cut him down before he mounted. Tension hung thick as fog. Then, from inside, the girl's voice rose, weak but insistent, calling out in Apache. The warrior's head tilted, listening. She spoke again, her words tumbling out in a fevered rush. Elias caught fragments of perhaps explaining, perhaps pleading. The leader shouted an order, and 2 warriors brushed past Elias, entering the cabin without resistance. He tensed, finger on the trigger, but held back. They emerged moments later, carrying the girl wrapped in his blanket. Her eyes met his, dark pools reflecting gratitude, or maybe just relief. She whispered something of thanks, perhaps in broken English. You. Good. The warriors mounted up, the girl placed gently before one of them. The leader lingered, staring at Elias with an unreadable expression. Then, with the nod that might have been respect or warning, he turned and vanished into the night, the party melting away like smoke. Elias stood there until the first light of dawn painted the east, rifle still clutched, his body aching from the vigil. The silence returned, heavier now, laced with the echo of what could have been a massacre. In the days that followed, Elias returned to his routine as attending horses, watering corn, mending fences. But the event lingered, a ripple in his solitary pond. Word spread to Redstone, carried by traders who'd glimpsed the Apache tracks. The story grew, the loner who'd faced down 100 warriors, bargaining with the devil himself. Elias ignored the stares when he rode in for supplies, the offers of drinks from wide-eyed men seeking tales. He knew that rather it wasn't bravery, just stubbornness, and a spark of compassion he thought long extinguished. Yet, as moons waxed and waned, signs appeared. A fresh killed deer left at his door, tracks of unseen visitors watching from the hills. The Apaches remembered, in their way, and Elias, the loner, found his isolation pierced, not by company, but by an unspoken bond forged in blood and mercy.